Official history pretends that the United States was surprised by the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. In reality, American President Franklin Roosevelt was seeking war with Japan to justify entering the war against Germany. He approved many plans to provoke war with Japan. The most aggressive was JB 355, that was secretly funded in August 1941 to send dozens of American bombers to China, painted with Chinese insignia, to bomb strategic targets in Japan. President Roosevelt approved this plan despite objections by General George Marshall and Secretary of War Stimson. They considered it an illegal act of war that required valuable aircraft needed by Britain and American forces in the Philippines. Joint Army-Navy Board Paper number 355, or JB 355, was conceived by Claire Chennault, a former U.S. Air Corps flyer who had been in the employ of Chinese General Chiang Kai-shek since 1937. Chennault had already formed the first American volunteer group that became known as the Flying Tigers. This consisted of 3 fighter squadrons that were ready in Burma in December 1941, but didn't engage in combat until shortly after Pearl Harbor. Chennault planned for a second American volunteer group that would fly bombers from air bases in eastern China to strike Japan's industrial centers at Osaka, Nagasaki, Yokohama, and Tokyo. JB 355 had the enthusiastic support of the powerful China lobby in Washington, D.C., led by China's ambassador T.V. Soong. He had completed a bachelor's degree in economics from Harvard University in 1915 and worked at Citibank in New York while pursuing graduate studies at Columbia University. Soong was the brother-in-law of Chiang Kai-shek and a multimillionaire. Soong convinced President Roosevelt to provide China with billions of dollars in Lend-Lease aid and to support Claire Chennault's plans. JB 355 was a flagrant violation of American and international law and blatantly violated the U.S. Neutrality Act. It established aerial squadrons crewed by American mercenaries without consultation or consent of Congress. President Roosevelt signed JB 355 on July 23, 1941, and bombs were expected to fall on Tokyo by the end of the year. The bomber proposed in a 1938 U.S. Army document, Chinese Aircraft Requirements, was the Douglas B-7, but in 1941, the Lockheed A-29 Hudson bomber was chosen, shown here. The number of bombers to be sent to China varied from 66 to 500, depending on the document. This took longer than expected, probably due to a lack of enthusiasm by Roosevelt's military staff. These bombers and crews had not arrived in China before Pearl Harbor and were quickly diverted to other missions once war began. Few Americans know about JB 355 because it remained classified until 1970, and the document was not discovered by historians until years later. ABC's news program, 2020, did a story on this secret in 1991.
This is 2020.
It's a Pearl Harbor anniversary story you probably won't see anywhere else. The intriguing possibility that in launching a sneak attack, Japan did to us what we might well have done to them. Tonight you'll hear the details of a secret plan approved at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
With the approach of the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, America has been getting a refresher course on the attack. We're reminded that in the fall of 1941, relations between the U.S. and Japan had steadily deteriorated. But untold is that the United States itself was plotting a secret effort against the Japanese.
But what most Americans don't know, and what President Roosevelt never disclosed, is that America had its own secret plan to bomb Japan first. This plan, signed and approved by FDR himself on July 23, 1941, nearly 5 months before Pearl Harbor.
I certainly didn't know that there were plans for strategic bombing of Japan before Pearl Harbor.
Are historians generally familiar or aware
I don't
of
think
this?
so. I've read, I've looked in some of the standard histories of this period, and I have not found any reference to this at all. So I think this is new.
This eye-opening document was actually declassified around 1970, but incredibly, it remained buried here at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. for decades. The plans are laid out in black and white, the planes that were to be used, their targets, and it proves that the official story of America's entry into World War II was by no means the whole story, and that from someone who was there. His name is Lachlan Curry. In 1941, he was one of the president's closest advisors, Roosevelt's personal envoy to China, and Claire Chennault's biggest supporter in the White House. Today, Curry lives in South America. He is 89 years old, and his voice is frail. But he did agree to help us understand those dramatic days preceding Pearl Harbor. Claire Chennault wanted to bomb Japan, didn't he?
Yes, very much so.
You were an enthusiastic supporter of Chennault's plan.
Oh, yes. And I helped in every way I could, yes.
To push the plan
To
through,
push it.
to see that it was executed.
The whole project, yes.
This was the secret plan, as presented to President Roosevelt, called JB 355, JB standing for Joint Board, which is the equivalent of today's Joint Chiefs of Staff. Discreetly labeled Aircraft Requirements of the Chinese Government, it lists among the strategical objectives destruction of Japanese factories in order to cripple production of munitions and essential articles for maintenance of economic structure in Japan. The distances from Chinese air bases to target cities in Japan are clearly mapped out. Nagasaki, 730 miles from Chuchao. Osaka, 1,060 miles from Manchao. Tokyo, 1,780 miles from Hangzhou. Was it workable? Were planes available that could do the job? An entry written by renowned General Hap Arnold says, the Lockheed Hudsons have ample range to perform missions against targets in Japan. Advanced bases are available in eastern China. It is 1,300 miles from these advanced bases to industrial Japan. On July 22, 1941, you sent a secret cable to Chennault. I am very happy to be able to report that today, the President directed that 66 bombers be made available to China this year, with 24 to be delivered immediately. Why would you be procuring bombers?
Well, actually, the purpose of bombers is to bomb. We can't pretend that we didn't know what the bombers were for.
And according to this plan, they were going to be manned by Americans.
Volunteer Americans were paid. They were mercenaries.
But the White House was very much in favor of it. So this had the blessing of the U.S. government.
It had the blessing of it.
The plan was signed off by the Secretary of War, the Secretary of the Navy, and approved by FDR. The date, July 23, 1941, almost 5 months before Pearl Harbor.
Despite this revelation, no one updated history books about JB 355 or other shocking revelations that surfaced after the Pearl Harbor attack. It has been documented that the attack on Pearl Harbor was expected, and information withheld from commanders in Hawaii that a Japanese naval force was coming to attack on December 7th. See the video link below. The attack on Pearl Harbor was no surprise.